On the morning of August 21st, 1992, in Boundary County, Idaho, 14-year-old Sammy Weaver noticed that his dog, Stryker, seemed to be in distress and was getting worked up at something outside their home. The dog took off into the nearby trees, and the boy followed behind. Soon after, the boy's voice pierced through the trees, claiming, "You shot Stryker, you son of a bitch." Gunshots were heard echoing through the forest. When the carnage stopped, Stryker the dog, 14-year-old Sammy Weaver, and U.S. Deputy Marshal William Deegan lay dead. With that, the 11-day standoff, later known as the Ruby Ridge Incident, began. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Gray. Let me take you back a bit. I want to point something out so that it sticks in your heads while this whole video is going on. I'm not making Randy out to be a hero or make anyone feel any type of sympathy for him. He actually wasn't a very nice person, and we'll get to that a little later. So yeah, enjoy. Randy Weaver was born on January 3rd, 1948 to Clarence and Wilma Weaver in Iowa. The family mostly provided for themselves through his father, who was a farmer. He and his brother would often help out his father with the farm. The Weavers were also incredibly religious, to the point of not really finding a place to fit in. It's said that the family attended evangelical, Presbyterian, all types of churches, eventually finding a home in baptism. Randy graduated from Jefferson High School in 1966, in which he attended Iowa Central Community College for 2 years afterward. Later, during the height of the conflict in Vietnam, Randy dropped out of said college where he found an interest and enlisted into the United States Army. However, I should point out that Randy actually never got deployed to Vietnam, and it's kind of a contested point at this point in the story. People don't know if Randy was actually a Green Beret or not, and I found no concrete evidence saying yes or no, so I'll leave it up to better people than me to decide. That also means you. Do your homework. You're a better person than I am. In 1970, during a period of leave from military service, Randy decided to visit his hometown where he met Vicki Jordanson, who is the woman that would eventually be his wife. He would eventually marry Vicki 1 month after his discharge from the military. I actually just found out, not too long ago, that Randy weirdly introduced himself to Vicki as Pete. As you do when you hate the name Randy. After their marriage in 1971, Randy tried his hand at college again. This didn't last too long, though, as he dropped out after the first semester from the University of Northern Iowa. He had found a job at a local John Deere factory and was paid well enough that I believe he just decided, hey, this college thing isn't it, and left. Vicki was actually also working at the time, following into a secretary position and later a homemaker. Now, for those of you that don't know what a homemaker is, it's a pretty interesting thing. A homemaker is a person that is hired, although not paid very well, to do the busy work around a person's home, like cooking, cleaning, doing dishes, etc. Apparently in Imperial China, this was a huge problem that went unchecked. You could probably call it the equivalent to maid service here in current times, but back then, for China, it was more like slavery. In the later half of the 70s, the religious influence that Randy was exposed to as a child began to take hold on him again, along with Vicki this time around. It's said that Vicki took a liking to the 1978 book titled The Late Great Planet Earth. The Late Great Planet Earth is described as a treatment of literalist, premillennial, dispensational eschatology. Now, for all of us folk who hadn't studied a billion years of political science, the book was known for comparing end-time prophecies from the Bible with events that were happening during this time to try to predict future scenarios, often apocalyptic. It was all of this that actually led to the couple adopting for Christian fundamental beliefs. Fundamentalists essentially believe in biblical literalism, basically a very fire and brimstone take on religion as a whole, so of course all of this led to Vicki to believe that the apocalypse was imminent. Vicki actually believed this apocalypse to be brought on by what she saw as corrupt civilization. Randy then decided to follow Vicki's vision of her family surviving this apocalypse by paying $5,000, selling their moving truck, and moving to a 20-acre property in a remote area in Boundary County, Idaho. I feel like I should mention this was a rental home. I actually have no idea what significance that plays, but in the script, it's capitalized. Rental home. I feel like you should know this. 1 year later, in 1988, Randy decided to, very unsuccessfully, run for Boundary County Sheriff by using the slogan, "Get out of jail free." You can actually see how this didn't turn out well for him at all. And he was also a white supremacist, which we'll talk about in a second. He also believed himself to be an Israelite. Yeah, like the old covenant biblical Israelite. In 1989, Randy met a man named Kenneth Fatal. That, my friends, is the one and only time that I am pronouncing that name because I know I butchered it. Randy met Kenneth at a meeting of the white supremacist group called the Aryan Nations. What Randy didn't know was that Kenneth was actually an undercover ATF agent investigating the Aryan Nation complex. I mean, this guy had an alias and everything, which apparently, for the alias, he chose Gus Magisano. Eventually, after getting closer with Randy, Kenneth tried to get Randy to sell him 2 sawed-off shotguns. If you know anything about the ATF, the sirens are blaring in your head right now. Randy replied to Kenneth's offer by saying he could supply him with 4 or 5 shotguns a week. As I said before, if you know anything about the ATF, this was heavily illegal in multiple ways. I feel like this for another video, to be honest. 1 year later, in 1990, you fucking guessed it, Randy received felony weapon charges for going through with the deal. This is where Randy actually receded into even more reclusion than before. After the charges were pressed against Randy, Vicky stepped in and wrote a nice little letter to U.S. Attorney Maurice Ellisworth. She addressed him as servant of the Queen of Babylon, and the letter read, "The stink of your lawlessness government has reached heaven, the abode of Yahweh, our Yahshua. Whether we live or whether we die, we will not bow to your evil commandments." In June of 1990, the ATF approached Randy and told him that they had valuable evidence that he violated federal gun laws and offered him a deal. In June of 1990, the ATF approached Randy again and told him that they had more valuable evidence that he was, in fact, in violation of more federal gun laws, and offered him a deal. They asked him to become an informant against the Aryan Nations. If he agreed, the gun charges would be dropped. He, of course, responded, "You can go to hell." After hearing about the ATF's actions for a second time, Vicky composed another letter. This time, she addressed it to the Aryan Nations and all our brethren of the Anglo-Saxon race. She goes on to warn them of the ATF agents, saying that they were looking for snitches, and that a warrant was issued for the arrest of Randy Weaver. In 1991, after all this seemingly blew over, Vicky Weaver gave birth to a girl who they named Elisheba. The name comes from the Hebrew Bible. Elisheba was the Israelite prophet Aaron, who was the elder brother of Moses and the first high priest of Israel. The Weavers by this time now had 4 children. In addition to Elisheba, there was Sarah, who was 15, Sammy, who was 13, and Rachel, who was 9. Some people also count Kevin Harris, who was kind of just a troubled teen, who the Weavers took in from time to time. Apparently he spent like months at a time inside the Weaver residence and kind of came and went as he pleased. So I will admit this is where the story gets kind of wild. Finding the in-between little things and the details were really hard. And Randy's actions are kind of out there at this point, so just bear with me. When Vicky sent the letter to the U.S. Attorney, it was in response to a missed court date for the gun charge that we discussed earlier. Around this time, the behavior of the Weaver family became even more recluse, and they even ramped up the tension between the family and the U.S. Marshals by a constant stream of threatening letters toward the federal government from Vicky. Deputy U.S. Marshals weren't very happy with how things were going and really wanted Weaver arrested. The U.S. Marshals even reluctantly considered calling in Special Operations Group, which is an elite Marshals force used for raids and difficult fugitive cases. And Randy wasn't doing well either at this point. He often had his children carrying guns and walking in front of him down the street to greet strangers. And I mean, things were ramping up pretty fast. By early 1992, Randy was starting to attract some national attention. Press figures and reporters from the Los Angeles Times requested multiple interviews with the Weavers. For some reason, the Weaver family would only talk to a single reporter. This reporter wrote for a small weekly paper in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. In the interview, Randy would state that the feds were more concerned about shutting their mouths than they were about the shotguns. The Weavers then went on to claim to not be Aryan or Nazis, but just people who came to Idaho, and I quote, to escape religious persecution. Vicky then goes on to state, there's nowhere left to escape our lawless rulers. The federal government felt attacked by the Weavers, and pressure was on for the U.S. Marshals to act. So, on August 21st, 1992, an SOG surveillance team consisting of 6 marshals entered the Weaver property with the intent of scouting for a position for an undercover plan to capture Weaver. At about 10:45 a.m., the operation was coming to a close as the 3 marshals started to make their way back down the mountain to rejoin the other 3 marshals waiting at the bottom. I've heard this story recounted a few different ways. One of the retellings was that one of the surveillance team members decided to test the reaction of the family dog by doing something really smart and throwing rocks at the window next to where the dog was sleeping, which obviously caught the attention of the dog and made him bolt into the woods toward the surveillance team. Now, the other retelling states that Stryker caught wind of their smell going down the mountain and followed it. Now, the other retelling is much more simple, just that Stryker caught wind of their smell going down the mountain and decided to follow it. Either way, Stryker the dog bolted towards the woods, followed by Sammy Weaver and Kevin Harris, who we discussed earlier. Stryker soon closed in on the location of the 3 marshals, Arthur Roderick, Larry Cooper, and 15-year SOG veteran Billy Deegan. The dog had Marshal Cooper cornered as Kevin Harris caught up. This is also a really contested point in the story. It's said that Cooper rose and shouted that they were U.S. Marshals, in which Deegan also rose from behind a tree stump and shouted for the men to freeze. Then shots rang out. Who shot first is probably one of the most contested points of this story even today. I guess we can go through the government retelling first. The government story is that Harris fired first, killing Billy Deegan. Cooper then opened fire on Kevin Harris, but missed. Roderick, who was further down the path, was worried that Stryker might give away the location of the 2 U.S. Marshals still hiding up the trail, so he fires, killing Stryker. The Fed story, however, doesn't account for how 13-year-old Sammy ended up dead with a bullet in his back. According to U.S. Deputy Marshals, they didn't even know that Sammy was dead. They had no idea that the 13-year-old was dead until they found his body days later inside of the Weaver's birthing shed. For those who don't know, a birthing shed is just a small kind of hut, almost garage-looking place it's basically just used for the birthing and care of newborn animals. Definitely not meant for the death of a human being. Kevin Harris later came forward offering a different telling of events. According to Kevin, when Roderick shot Stryker, Sammy Weaver yelled, "You shot my dog, you son of a bitch," and began to fire at the marshals. Marshal Deegan fired at Sammy. Kevin then fired at Marshal Deegan, striking Deegan and killing him. He later claimed that he was doing this strictly to protect Sammy. Of course, this incident did not sit well with U.S. Marshals, but keep in mind the only thing that U.S. Marshals at this point knew was that Sammy and Kevin opened fire on deputies and killed one of them. No one at the time knew that Sammy was shot and killed. All this set off some pretty major alarm bells to the higher-ups in Washington, who would now be changing the rules of engagement to allow agents, and I quote, to shoot and kill any adult at Ruby Ridge if they are actively in possession of a visible firearm. And this rule stood whether or not the adult was presently posing a risk of bodily harm or death. Like, what? The FBI's hostage rescue team arrived in Idaho early the next morning, and they brought snipers. One particular sniper will be very important not only to this story, but another one in the future, and we'll get to that. On August 22nd, the sniper team was told that if anyone of adult age was seen carrying a weapon, deadly force can and should be used against them. Keep in mind, throughout this entire event, the FBI made no attempt to have a conversation with Randy, let alone a surrender demand. No conversations have been had at all up until this point. They tiptoed up there, killed his dog and his son, and dipped out. Shortly after receiving his brief from the situation, sniper Len Horiuchi took his position at a lower slope towards the bottom of the ridge. Sarah, Randy, and Kevin decided to leave the cabin and walk over to the shed to visit Sammy's body. As Randy reached for the shed door, a bullet tore through his arm. When the shot rang out and Randy realized he had been shot, the three ran back towards the cabin and dove in, screaming. After getting their bearings and rising from the floor, the next shot rang out. Unbeknownst to the hostage rescue team, this particular shot passed through Vicki Weaver's brain and lodged itself in the arm of Kevin Harris. I couldn't really imagine at this point what any of them are feeling. I mean, one day you have Randy that's missing a court date and has a warrant, and the next he loses his son and his dog, and later that same day he's shot in the arm and his wife in the head. She now lays on the kitchen floor, unmoving next to them, all while no attempt at contact has been made by the FBI. The family from this point on stayed as low to the ground as they could, and hours passed without incident. Kevin, however, wasn't doing too great. 3 hours after the bullet hit Harris in the arm, he was coughing up blood and in an incredible amount of pain, no doubt due to some form of infection from the wound being untreated. In agony, Kevin began to beg Randy to finish him off, as the pain was just too much for him. Randy replied, "Kevin, I can't do that." It's around this time that negotiations for surrender took place, and continued for days as angry right-wing protesters began to gather at the base of Ruby Ridge, with some of these protesters traveling as far as Las Vegas and Portland to protest the ATF's actions here. Some of the negotiations from the ATF were made under the assumption that Vicki Weaver was still alive. I'm going to repeat that one more time for you. Some of the negotiations from the ATF were under the assumption that Vicki Weaver was still alive. These attempts, of course, failed miserably. One of them was made by a negotiator on the third day, and he stated, "Good morning, Miss Weaver. We had pancakes this morning. What did you have for breakfast?" The negotiators then continued by asking Vicki to send the children out for some pancakes. I'm sure you know this, but keep in mind the remaining Weavers saw this as pure evil, as Vicki's decaying body was just a few feet away from them in the kitchen. This was obviously just to them an extremely cruel joke. At this point, Kevin and Randy pretty much expected to be killed at any moment, and began writing down their account of events of the last few days. On August 30th, the long and gruesome standoff came to a close when Randy agreed to speak with a man named Bo Gritz. Bo Gritz is a former Green Beret and a friend of Randy's who shared his right-wing political views. Bo was able to convince the still alive but very much in pain Kevin Harris to come down to the bottom of the ridge to receive medical treatment. The rest of the Weaver family surrendered one day later when Bo had informed Randy that a famous defense attorney named Gary Spence had agreed to represent Weaver in his trial following this event. The FBI's top agent at Ruby Ridge, Gene Glenn, said of the events, and I quote, "We are very sorry. There are no winners in a situation with all this sadness." Dude, what an experience. I'm not even sure that I can begin to understand the thoughts and feelings of the people that were involved in this tremendous fuck up of an event. I can only hope that the remaining children of Randy and Vicki have found some type of peace in their lives and can go on to do something worthwhile. I won't be going into any of the details of the trial in this video. I think that deserves another video altogether. If you'd like to see that, then let me know down in the comments and we'll make a part 2. Quick notable point, Wendigoon here on YouTube has a great YouTube channel to check out for the events that happened here, just in excruciating detail. I'm pretty sure the video is like 2 hours long. It's everything that we discussed here, just in really high detail, so go check that out. For anyone reminded of your mortality after hearing something like this, you're not alone. Take a deep breath, remember that you're okay, take a break if you have to, and I'll see you all very soon.